If you're filing for divorce in Texas, there's a concept you've got to understand, but you may miss. That's a geographic restriction, or a geo restriction for short. And the thing about a geographic restriction is it can really change the entire course of the rest of your life, and often isn't even really talked about until you're at mediation. So let's start with, what is a geographic restriction? The way I think about this is I want you to picture a bubble. Remember that movie, The Truman Show, where there's like this bubble that Jim Carrey lived in? It's sort of like that around the primary parent and the kids. So typically what happens, and like what's going to be the standard unless you negotiate otherwise in the state of Texas, is the county where you file for divorce. Imagine a big Truman Show bubble around it, because that's where you and those kids are going to stay. And then if you ever want to move out of that restriction, you kind of can't. Or normally a court would say, like, okay, you can go ahead and go, but them kids are going to stay, which of course you're not going to leave your kids behind. And sometimes in mediation, like most often, but you have to negotiate for this, is you'll have what's called a geographic restriction lifting provision. So what that would mean is, because this bubble only restricts you, not the other party. So like you have to stay in Travis County, for example, but your co-parent can live wherever. Now it may affect some of their possession, but they're not restricted to Travis County. But the lifting provision changes that, where if whenever you want to move out of the bubble, out of your Travis County bubble, and say you want to move into Williamson County, just next door, you can do that if at the time you want to move, the other party moved outside of the geographic restriction. So they live outside of the bubble, they pop the bubble on their way out, and then you can move oftentimes kind of anywhere you want. Now, that's a technicality. And this is a thing people miss all the time about the way law works, and particularly family law. It doesn't work on technicalities for the most part, unless you're talking about a motion for enforcement where like jail time's involved. But the rest of it, pretty much, the technicality is not going to get you there. So like, don't think that if they move outside of the geo that you can all of a sudden move to Alaska. Like, maybe you could, but probably they're going to try to stop you, and a court's going to be like, whoa, not so fast, mister or sis, you're going to have to stay put. So it's a little bit in the weeds, but essentially a geographic restriction is probably going to come up for you either at mediation or at a final trial. The most likely outcome is the county in which you file, and perhaps the counties that touch it, the adjacent counties, or contiguous counties, they call it. So like Travis County might be Williamson County, Hayes, Comal. It kind of depends on where you live. So before you go to mediation, it would be a really good idea to talk to your attorney to make sure you guys are on the same page about what you want in terms of where you and the kids live after the divorce is done. Before you ever file for divorce, you need to be real sure that you want to live in the county in which you currently sit. People miss this all the time. So they want to file for divorce and they currently live in Williamson County up in Georgetown or something. And then, oh, actually, I want to move back. This happens all the time, back to Oregon, where I'm from. And like pretty much you're not moving back to Oregon where you're from if you're filing for a divorce in Williamson County, Texas, or Travis County, or any of the counties in Texas. I always explain Texas is very jealous with its children. That's the best way I know how to say, like, Texas kids are staying Texas kids. They ain't moving off for the most part. Now, in my personal experience and professional experience, judges in particular are pretty stuck on this issue that you're going to stay in this county or maybe contiguous, like touching adjacent counties to here. Everybody's going to after the divorce, like freeze and stay put. One thing that's really kind of weird about Texas that other states are always super shocked about is that issue can actually be tried to a jury in a custody case. So if you think a judge is going to for sure limit you, you could ask to be able to go back to Oregon or from whence you came and get that to a jury. The conventional wisdom is that juries are less strict about this. They don't think you have to stay put. They may weigh all of the evidence and say, look, like, there's a reason they only moved to Texas for her job. Actually, they're from Oregon. All of their family is in Oregon. The kids can go to a really good school. Their old dance team is in Oregon. Let's let them go. So if you wanted to not have a geographic restriction to where you file, you may consider going the jury route. The catch there is the jury route is real expensive, and you're going to need to assess that cost up front. And even if you put in all of that money and work really hard to get it at the jury level, it may still not happen. So, like, if you don't ask for it, you won't get it. But if you ask for it, that doesn't mean you'll get it. And you may spend a real lot of money trying to find out. Moving out of state custody and divorce cases are really tricky. And my number one piece of advice is before you do anything or file anything, absolutely talk to a lawyer because this is in deep waters. Like I was remembering about a client of mine, and fortunately, he called me because he had just moved out of state with his wife and his kids. And there was something about their life circumstances where he thought, okay, in this move, I can probably save my marriage or like at least have a shot. And she kind of wants to move there. So we moved up there. We kept our house back in Texas, but we moved up there. We're just going to try it for a while. And fortunately, he was referred to me by a friend of mine. And I talked to him and I was like, what are you doing? You've got to get back home. Once you live in that state for 6 months or better, that's now going to be the state where your divorce is going to happen. And more than likely, you and those kids are going to stay put for the next 10 or 12 years. They were like kind of little at the time. And so we thought through together the strategy to unring that bell of moving off to see if they could save their marriage and then come back to Texas. And then we had to wait the requisite period of time to make sure they could go ahead and file here, like at least the 90 days. Gets a little twisty-turny at that point. And he did, waited it out. We ended up going to a mediation. He was a really great guy, did right by his wife that they weren't working out, has a really great custody schedule with his kids, and is just a stand-up all-around dude. And I'm so grateful that he called me. I remember I was in a hotel room and took his call, like hiding from my kids in the bathroom. I'm so glad that I did because now he and his kids are going to be Texas residents as long as they want to be while they're still here. And it really worked out better for everybody in the end.